Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Golden Cabinet podcast where we have interviews with world-class TCM community leaders to discover their stories, their habits, their psychology, and secrets that led to their success. And I am elated to be here today with a man who needs no introduction. You've been living under a rock. I'm pretty sure if you don't know who Bob Flaws is. Thank you so much. Formerly Bob Flaws, now Lama Pema. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so honored.
Thank you, Spence. My pleasure.
Awesome. Excellent. So we all have known Bob Flaws through Blue Poppy, through wonderful translations and books that you've written over the years. Playing a huge role in being responsible for the birth and growth of traditional Chinese medicine, if more accurately, I know you'll correct me, but in the West here. And I know I can speak for everybody at how grateful we are for all your contributions and what you've done throughout time and how you've taught so many people. And now this current chapter of your life, if I may, is just so fascinating. And as I was saying before we hit the record button, I'm so happy and excited for you. But we'll get to that, I guarantee it, obviously. But for those few people that may not know who Bob Flaws or now Lama Pema is, could you said okay to some stories, some background, and how you got into studying Chinese medicine, and it's been how many years?
I practiced Chinese medicine for 30 years. Anyway, in response to your question, I became a Tibetan Buddhist. Let me back up. I dropped acid. And became a Tibetan Buddhist 50 years ago.
50 years ago, right?
Just shy of 50 years ago, 48 and change to be absolutely accurate. I bought a one-way ticket to India. I went to India. And I went to India a couple of times trying to find a teacher. I eventually found a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. And I studied Tibetan Buddhism for 6 or 7 years before getting involved with Chinese medicine. When I hit 30 or so, I realized that I was not going to become a Buddha anytime in the near future, and that I needed a way to support myself.
Right. Okay.
For the longer haul, and I wanted to study Tibetan medicine because that would, dovetail with my religious practice. But there wasn't really any way to do that in the mid to late 70s. My teachers wouldn't let me go back to India to study with Tibetan doctors there. There was no way to study Tibetan medicine here. And so it occurred to me that Chinese medicine was a kissing cousin.
Okay.
And,
all right.
Close enough for jazz.
Right.
And so I found a old Chinese doctor who lived in Denver.
Okay.
I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and I became a student and studied acupuncture primarily with him. And then I started teaching myself from whatever was available in English about Chinese herbal medicine. And that goes from about 78 to 81 or so.
Good memory.
And then I met someone an American who had just come back from Beijing, who had done one of the World Health Organization 3-month trainings there. And so hadn't heard of those before.
Right.
And he kind of filled me in, and I applied to the Shanghai College of TCM and went there, did their 3-month acupuncture training, and then I went back from 1982 through 86. I would go for a number of months, and then my wife would go for a number of months, and then I would go for a number of months, and my wife would go for a number of months. So we studied acupuncture, Tui Na, herbal medicine. So that's kind of how I got my education. And then I practiced in Boulder for 30 years approximately. Mm-hmm. And along the way, we created Blue Poppy. At first it was Blue Poppy Press.
Right.
And then somebody said, well, books are good, but really what you're doing is teaching, so you should, teach. And so I started teaching, and then somebody came along and said, oh, well, distance learning is good. So then we started distance learning.
Nice.
And then one of my students was living in Vietnam, and he said, what if you created a line of herbal products? We manufacture them here in Vietnam. And so I said yes to that. But it turned out that they couldn't manufacture to the quality specs that we had. And so, but I had spent a couple of months, kind of ginning that project up, and so I wasn't ready. I wasn't willing to let it just go. And so then I found a Chinese company that was willing to manufacture. So then we had Blue Poppy herbs, and then eventually we started selling needles, and then everything else under the sun that had anything to do with the Chinese. So that's a synopsis of my Chinese medical life. I taught myself to read Chinese. Yep. I translated a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I had always wanted to be a writer, and so in college I was an American literature major with the idea that I was going to write the great American novel.
Okay.
And it didn't pan out, but I always had some ability to write, and so that's what really got me into writing books, translating, etc.
Yeah, the research papers that you've translated, the countless books that you've translated and written, it permeates so deeply into the TCM culture. I'm so influenced by you on how I approach my clinical practice still today. Your diagnostics and how you was it Einstein that said something to the effect of make everything as simple as possible but not simpler, or something to that effect. I'm probably not doing it any justice, but you help me truly frame things that sometimes coming out of school can feel so big and be so lost within the sea of all these different schools, and when you actually see a patient in front of you, it's like, oh no, what do I do now? You really help me, at least there.
So that really goes to what you're interested in is what I'm doing now, and that really speaks to that a little bit, because it really was my intense Buddhist practice that helped me help develop my memory, my mental clarity, my focus, my energy. So all of that, I had 15 years or so of that training before I ever started writing anything about Chinese medicine.
Right.
So I had been a very what to say, diligent, persevering, intense practitioner for 15 years before, ever applying any of those skills to Chinese medicine. And then once I did start, writing and etc., well, then that it became like a ball rolling downhill, and it had its own life. And like any other life, it had its growth and its maturity, and then it eventually had its decline.
Right.
Away.
Right. Its decline. Everything has its life cycle. Do you want to touch on? I don't know how to frame it, but toward the end of your, career or time or chapter in Chinese medicine, and why and how the transition into today, or into what you're up to now with Life More?
I don't know how much I want to get into all of that. Blue Poppy still exists. It has a different owner, and I don't want to
okay. Yeah.
Speak out of school. But another reason that I got into Chinese medicine, which I don't think many people know, and that is that since I was 18, I had suffered from heart arrhythmia. Oh. And a lot of my research in Chinese medicine was research on how to try to deal with my own health issues.
Sure.
And those health issues continued cyclically off and on throughout my entire adult life. But in my 60s started getting much worse. And so I've had 3 heart surgeries, and on medication, and I have a pacemaker. And so by certainly my mid-60s, I'm 72 now, by my mid-60s, mortality was becoming quite an issue.
Right.
And that's, I suppose that's why I resurrected or threw myself back into my Buddhist practice. For while I was at the height of my Chinese medical practice, my Buddhist practice was very simple, very, I want to say minimal. It wasn't insignificant, but it wasn't elaborate. It was very, what also to say, under the tables. I didn't talk about it. Anyway, but because of my health issues, I really realized that time was running out and that I needed to get my shit together.
Right.
So that's why I went back into Tibetan Buddhism with my original kind of perseverance and focus and energy. Yeah.
Excellent. So
and then at first, while I was still with Blue Poppy, I was only working at Blue Poppy for several years, half time, and then the rest of my day was practicing Buddhism. And then right at 64, I received a small inheritance, which allowed me to walk away from Blue Poppy completely. And that's when I started practicing full time. And I did the equivalent of 3 years of retreat, in home retreat. And then sometime after that, I was given the title Lama by my teachers to acknowledge my practice. Lama literally means guru, and I'm not a guru, but for me, the title is that means that I'm a full-time practitioner, and that some of my teachers appreciate the quality of my practice.
Well, from what I know of you, Bob, anything that you set your mind to, I'm not sure what gifts you were given, from your parents or pre-heaven essence, however, but you're always able to pick up on languages and learn and be able to soak in, things that you were interested in. That little bit I knew about you, and it was enviable, and it highlighted itself. I remember when you were giving a conference, and there was a Chinese lady that I think she was a representative of one of the herbal companies, and the company name in Vancouver is called Bema, and you started having a conversation with her about the name, and I think I remember you talking about Pema at that time. So Lama? What is the? I forget what the conversation was. I think you ended up talking to her in Chinese, but what's Pema mean? Do you mind sharing that?
It's the first part of my religious name. My religious name for 48 years has been Pema Chopel.
Okay.
Pema means, literally it means lotus, but in this particular case, it's also the name of the founder of the sect, the lineage I belong to. So it's like being named after the original teacher.
Got it.
Then Chopel means to make the Dharma flourish, to expand, to make the Dharma thing bigger.
Okay.
So and so most of the time I use the name just simply Lama Pema. Sometimes Pema Chopel gets abbreviated to Pecho,
right.
Especially in Eastern Tibet. But yeah, around the house I'm Bob.
Bob, okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. For the last...
I was going to be on video today. I actually would have worn my uniform.
Oh, okay. Well...
It's a Sunday morning, so I didn't think I was going to be on video, so I'm just in my street clothes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about that. And I'm just glad we got the video going on for my selfish side. But it's nice to see you. Maybe next time, so for that was about 7-8 years ago. Is that right? When the TCM chapter closed finally?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I was in my 64th year, and then moving into my 65th year, that's when I completely gave up everything to do with Chinese medicine, blue poppy. The only thing that I continued is that my wife and I volunteered in Nepal for a month at a time at a clinic in a monastery in Bodha in Nepal. So every year I would spend a month doing acupuncture for free on local people there, Tibetans, Nepalis, and then also I had the good luck or honor to be a doctor to one of my teachers in Nepal, who was. I started treating him at 99, and I continued treating him until I think he was 102. Very, very famous Tibetan Lama.
Wow.
So that was, and so actually, I have said that my 30 years detour into Chinese medicine was so that I could treat this teacher.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's beautiful. That's great. So do you feel light? Do you feel, looking back at Chinese medicine, kind of what was that doing to your chi, and I don't even know how to frame this question, Bob, but how do you feel different now that you've gone back to your spiritual or religious practice full time?
I don't know. I guess I guess a little part of me was always conflicted about Chinese medicine, in that it was taking me away from my practice.
Right.
So now I don't have that conflict. I had a good life in Chinese medicine. I had some success, I guess you would say success, financially and emotionally. And for a number of years, it did consume me. I mean, I did really. It was my focus. I mean, it was. I lived, ate, and drank Chinese medicine for a number of years. But when I stopped, people said, "Oh, you'll be back," and I said, "No, not really," because it really. I had wanted to move on for a good 4 or 5 years before I ever was able to completely quit and walk away from it. So when I did quit and walk away from it, people say, "Oh, don't you miss it?" Or "Don't you ever want to go back and do it?" Or and no, I was that karma had run its course, and I was completely finished with it. So I'm not sad to not be involved anymore. If anything, I'm really happy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm doing what I really want to do.
Right.
And have no conflict of interest. There's I get up every morning at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I practice till 6 in the evening, and then I'm with Honora for a couple of hours, and then the next day is the same, and I'm really doing what I want to be doing.
Yeah. It shows your spirit seems at peace, or at least from what I can pick up from here. Do you mind saying what a day kind of, or telling people what a day kind of looks like, a practice? It's just out of my own.
So I'm a Tibetan Buddhist, which means Vajrayana Buddhist or Tantric Buddhist. So our practice has a lot to do with mantra, recitation of mantra, and a lot to do with visualization, very complex visualizations. It has a lot to do with ritual magic. It has a lot to do with working for the sake of all sentient beings. That we practice not just to, I'm going to say, save ourselves, liberate ourselves, but for every sentient being covered by the sky. That's a lot.
That is a lot. A lot. Yeah. No pressure.
So our practice is in 3-hour blocks.
Okay.
For years I got up at 3, and then because of my health, my teachers told me that I had to sleep an extra hour. So now I get up at 4. I practice from 4 to 7. I take a walk, eat breakfast, hang out with my wife a little bit, do some exercises, and then 9 to 12 I practice again. 12 to 1 is lunch, take another walk, be with my wife. 1 to 4, again practice. So now that's 9 hours. Mm-hmm. Then another walk. Then at 4:30 to 6, another hour and a half. And then many days, that's then from 6 on, then my wife and I relax, hang out. However, some of the time I also do lead pujas or ceremonies. That being a Lama, that's another thing that goes along with being a Lama, is that I officiate at various different types of pujas or ceremonies. So some evenings or on weekends, then that I also do that. So. And then we go on pilgrimage. We visit holy places, Buddhist holy places, every year pretty much. We go somewhere. Been to Tibet a number of times, in Sikkim, Nepal many times, Bhutan, China. So, it was interesting to be in China, really Chinese part of China, not Tibetan part of China, but Chinese part of China, and be there as a Buddhist and not as a Chinese doctor.
Right, right.
But some of our people got ill, right? So I had to go to the Chinese pharmacy to get them the right medicines.
Right, right.
And that was fun.
Yeah, you can't leave that behind. Totally, never. Oh, it sounds very peaceful, and I'm so happy for you, Lama. That's so great. So, okay, thank you for sharing what your day looks like. That's I just am at peace listening to it. But what if you could look back now at yourself, because obviously this will be, the audience is practitioners of Chinese medicine or acupuncture. What might you give the 20-year-old self or 30-year-old self? What kind of advice might you have now, looking back at, how to practice or how to, keep more balance or anything, I guess, from wisdom you've imparted along the way, including now? Or because I would love to hear anything, from you.
Oh, wow. Well, when I got into Chinese medicine, I was very much a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, and I don't know if you've ever seen any of my earliest work, books like Timing in the Times, Something Old, Something New, Path of Pregnancy, where I was really combining Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan medicine with Chinese medicine. And my early work often did encourage that while practicing Chinese medicine, it was important to do that out of a sense of compassion and also to incorporate the spiritual side into the practice of medicine.
Right.
That kind of that disappeared in the middle years, where I really was focusing on trying to help Westerners understand Chinese medicine the way Chinese understand Chinese medicine in China today. And their approach mostly in China today is a very secular, mundane, not spiritual, not religious practice. And so most of my books and lectures and etc. are all on a very secular version of Chinese medicine. And I think that if I look at what's going on today, my wife still teaches at a school here in Boulder.
Right.
And so I do meet students from time to time, and I do hear about what's going on, and etc. I would encourage practitioners today to try to incorporate their spirituality into their practice, and encourage practitioners to not just get lost on the technical nitty-gritty of it. We talk about our medicine being holistic medicine, and it is in the sense of the body-mind, continuum. That it's certainly holistic from that point of view, but I think sometimes maybe the modern Chinese approach does lack some spiritual qualities. So I think I would maybe go back and, say, not to forget that, that side of it. Yeah.
Right.
This last May, I went to the big conference in Rothenburg, Germany. There's a big, for those who don't know, there's for 50 years, maybe 75 years, since the end of World War II. There's been a big conference every May in Rothenburg, Germany, for acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And people come from all over the world. During my the heyday of my career, I was a featured teacher at that conference for many years. And then when I stopped doing Chinese medicine, I hadn't been back to that conference for maybe 10 years or more. And so I asked them if they would be interested in my coming and giving a class on how the spiritual side of Tibetan medicine could make up for the spiritual shortfall in Chinese medicine.
Wow. Okay.
And so I went and taught that class, which I kind of had to make up. I mean, that class didn't exist really, it was. I think it was very well received, and people enjoyed it, and so. If I had anything to, my generation, when we went to Chinese medicine, it was part of this bigger journey to the East. I don't know if you've ever read any Hermann Hesse. He had a book called Journey to the East. It was very influential when I was in my early 20s. And it's what got a lot of people on the road, to India and Nepal, Afghanistan and, Pakistan, etc. So my interest in Chinese medicine was part of this whole much larger spiritual quest, where the medicine was a part of that, and was a way of funding that. I mean, it was a means to an end. It was how I put the bread on the table and the money in the pocket in order to have this larger quest, larger vision. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't see that today in the young acupuncturists. I don't, there's such focus on the mechanics of it, and such focus on, there's so many classes they have to take and exams they have to pass, and they've run up these huge debts, and therefore they have to be so focused on being a good business person as well as a good practitioner, try to repay those debts, and et cetera. So that's what I would maybe urge people to not overlook, and that is the whole spiritual side of this journey, this journey to the East. Yeah. It's a great book. People, if you get a chance to read it, read The Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse. It's a book that really shaped the lives of a lot of people from the baby boom generation that got into Chinese medicine in the early days.
Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse. Got it. That was, if we got to it, that would have been one of my questions. Do you have any recommendations of study or literature or that you would recommend? So thank you for that.
Well, I said that when in the early 70s, mid 70s, there was no way to study Tibetan medicine. But now Tibetan medicine is definitely studyable here in the United States, here in Western Europe, in Europe, not Western Europe, just Europe, Western and Eastern Europe. And so I would encourage practitioners of Chinese medicine to maybe take some classes in Tibetan medicine and see if there's anything there that could be a useful adjunct or something to make up for any shortfalls that do exist in Chinese medicine. There's a lot of classes. There's a couple of schools now, and there's some interesting stuff there that people might be interested in.
I remember you always saying, you were very clear on what you were teaching. It was a post-Mao traditional Chinese medicine, the secular, I think, that you're more referring to now. So Tibetan medicine doesn't have the acupuncture, but has an herbal medical component, or medicinal component, but is it more? It brings in more of some Buddhist principles or spiritual.
It has exhaustion, it has cupping, it has massage, it has acupuncture, but kind of rudimentary acupuncture. And in fact, the Tibetans are very happy to include Chinese acupuncture into Tibetan medicine.
Right.
So it has most of the modalities of Chinese medicine. It has most of the theories of Chinese medicine. It has also some other theories from Ayurvedic medicine that have been added on. Mm-hmm. And then it has all of these spiritual practices for developing qualities within the practitioner, like compassion, loving compassion, kindness. It has ways of developing supernormal pulse reading. When we read the stories of pulse reading from the past, and we wonder, well, gee, I don't know, we didn't learn that in school, but we hear about them, we read about them. Well, the Tibetans are still kept all that alive. Okay. And blessing medicines so that they are more powerful. For instance, in Tibetan medicine, there are ways of determining whether a disease will respond to medical treatment alone, or will require medicine plus some sort of spiritual intervention, okay. Or whether, in fact, due to past life karma, it's not treatable. The person's not going to get better. Okay. So there's some interesting stuff there that doesn't really exist in Chinese medicine. So many these days, when I'm out and about going to Buddhist teachings or going to retreats in other places, and there's a significant number of Chinese medical practitioners, acupuncturists that are involved in Tibetan medicine and Tibetan Buddhism, much larger than should be if you just looked at what I would say. If it wasn't for Chinese, how did I put this? There's a disproportionate number of acupuncturists and Chinese medical practitioners involved in Tibetan medicine and Tibetan Buddhism in the world, not even just here in the United States or North America, but in the world at large. It's very common to go to some Tibetan Buddhist practice or teaching, and the person sitting next to you to be an acupuncturist or a practitioner of Chinese medicine. Right. So there's a lot of stuff there that could be incorporated and is quite useful. Yeah.
Is it? You would know the history far more than I, but if you go back into Chinese medical history, is more of this the spiritual component, from the Taoist, culture, or is that just been bred out and standardized? Is that partly where it kind of disappeared, or?
That's a very big and complicated story. There's no simple answer to that. One of the things that I could say is that I did a lot of translation,
Yeah.
and from the Yuan dynasty on, Yuan dynasty meaning the 1200s, time of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan. From that time on, all of the books that were written and became famous, I'm going to say classics of Chinese medicine, were all written by Confucianists. The Buddhists weren't writing books, or the books they were writing didn't become, nationally important. The Taoists either weren't writing the books, or those books were only being used within the Taoist circle.
Right. Okay.
But all of the great names of Chinese medicine, Ye Tianshi, Li Dongyuan, I haven't thought of these names for years, but Zheng Jinyue, etc. They were all Confucianists, and so that is one of the reasons why the school version of Chinese medicine has been for several hundred years a secular version of Chinese medicine. So, it's not that individual practitioners weren't also doing spiritual type stuff,
right.
but that stuff didn't show up in the classic literature.
Okay.
Because of the Confucian bias. I mean, I know as Westerners we like to say Chinese medicine is Taoist, but if you go, write down a list of the most important seminal books in Chinese medicine, only one or two were written by anybody who was an avowed Taoist.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating history and well worth looking into.
Right.
If you're interested in that kind of thing.
Right. I thank you for this. The spiritual component, as in some way, shape, or form, I feel like that's, or at least the allure of it is what attracted me to it. Because in the grand scheme of medicines that are around the world that you could study, 20 years ago when I started as well, it, quote unquote, seemed to have more of a spiritual component than the rest. So to keep diving deeply, and this Tibetan side is amazing, and I'm for sure going to look deeper into that as well, because you start out, like you said, maybe from that place, and then you have to learn almost the mechanical version of it, and because you want to be accepted maybe by people in the West that expect a bit more of a mechanical medicine, and the business component as well, putting bread on the table, but now again, the deeper I get with my patients, I've been very focused in reproductive health my whole career in Chinese medicine, and I've found that it takes me a very short period of time to get the mechanics, and the physical into, a little, put a bow on it and say, okay, this is how you can take care of yourself there. But now we need to open up and talk about, your spiritual practices, because that's just, I think maybe me projecting onto them, but it's what I want to talk about, and I feel what really deeply is healing to people, especially when something so profound, they're faced with something so profound in their life. I see other practitioners, too, maybe studying shamanism from, or I don't know if that's the right term. I know shamans don't like the word always, but from Peru, getting involved in sweat lodges and ayahuasca ceremonies and all kinds of things that somehow maybe they're trying to fill a void that they did get into Chinese medicine for, that was not quite there after they studied.
And that's the neat thing about Tibetan medicine is that it has all of these things. It doesn't have sweat lodges necessarily, but it has all sorts of magic and mystery and arcane practices, etc., secret teachings, and etc. But it all dovetails with our theory. It all dovetails with theory that is either part of Chinese medicine or kissing cousin to Chinese medicine, and could easily, you asked about history. It really was Sun Simiao in the Tang Dynasty who was the last really great Chinese medical doctor who advocated the integration of the spiritual side, the religious side, the spiritual side into Chinese medicine. He studied Ayurvedic medicine, Indian Buddhist Ayurvedic medicine, and tried to graft that onto his version of Chinese medicine.
Okay.
And, he had mantra and magical ceremonies, etc., and all. And he was really the last great Chinese doctor that we look upon as being seminal. And today we still study his formulas and some of his books, etc. He was the last one to really try to preserve that, and more than preserve it, even promote that in Chinese medicine. And then after that, for a variety of reasons, what I'm going to call the naturalist school of Chinese medicine, the secular Confucian naturalist school of Chinese medicine became dominant. And so, we don't really look at Sun Simiao's chapters that have to do with spiritual things.
Right.
We only talk about his formulas that, that we can look at and say, this is Chinese medicine as we know it today.
Right.
I know these herbs.
Right.
I learned this formula in school.
Right.
But if one wanted to go back and see a Chinese medicine that still had the full integration of the spiritual with the Chinese medicine, I would say, go back and look at Sun Simiao's books. Yeah.
He, he's also famous for the ghost point, so maybe that's such an elusive topic for so many people, and maybe that's kind of a seed of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I went to his, he was a hermit.
Okay.
He lived in Shanxi, and he lived on top of a mountain in a temple, hermitage. He spent a lot of time meditating and practice. And on the mountain just across from him, he had a Buddhist abbot was his best friend, and so they would get together and share, and etc. He was. He probably would say that he was a Taoist, but he incorporated a lot of Buddhism into his practice. And in fact, if you look at his medical ethics, they're exactly the Mahayana Buddhist Bodhisattvic vow. Oh, sorry. Okay. They are exactly the Buddhist Bodhisattvic vow, almost word for word, applied to medicine. So I've been to his now it's a temple complex, and there's a cave there. And the story is that Sun Simiao treated a snake. I don't remember what was wrong with the snake, but the snake was a child, a son or daughter of the dragon that lived in the mountain. Buddhists would say a naga. Naga spirit, and there's a cave, and it's said that the Naga king the Dragon King was so happy that Sun Miao had cured his son that he then imparted the secrets of medicine to Sun Miao through this cave. That he spoke to Sun Miao. So
I love that.
That's very far away from modern TCM. But you can still go there.
But it contains the magic that like fills the void that you spoke to that's there maybe.
And some people, not everybody.
Yeah. Yes. True. Yeah.
But a lot of people, and a lot of people then do, look to other cultures and other religious systems to fill that in, and that's great. However you do it, if it works for you and your patients.
Right.
But the Tibetan system is very interesting because it's so close. It really is a cousin. Another quick story. A few years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was in a very remote part of Tibet visiting a monastery there. And at the monastery, they had a medical clinic. And in the medical clinic, there were Tibetan medicines and there were Chinese medicines. And the doctor was, quote unquote, a Tibetan medical doctor, but he was prescribing these Chinese medicines. And I asked him, I said, is there any conflict here? Or, these are two slightly different systems. And, how is it that, you're... And, he said, these Chinese medicines work really great. And, they're very effective and they're cheap and they're easy. And, so we use them no problem, Okay. And, in the same way, there are certain things that Tibetan medicine can do that Chinese medicine can't do so well. Certain formulas and, treatment protocols and all. So in Tibet, they have no problem with, combining the two of these medicines. And as I say, a lot of Tibetan lamas regularly get acupuncture and use Chinese medicine.
Right. I guess from the same part of the world, or same somewhat area, there must be underpinning philosophical, evolutions that keep them cousins. You're calling them, I guess. What's from here forward for Lama Pema or for Bob Flaws? What's more of the same? Do you have, plans with your wife? I'll digress a second. But I spoke to you, I think you're going to take your kids and your whole family on a motorcycle trip through India. And I assume that was epic.
That's in the early 2000s. That was like 2002 or something like that.
Yeah. That was fun. Yeah. So what is there any more adventures?
So back, I was into motorcycles. I was building motorcycles. Because of my heart condition, I was passing out. And it's not really so good to ride a motorcycle and pass out.
No.
It's not good to drive a car either, but
4 wheels.
But in a motorcycle, it's even more critical.
Okay.
So I 6 or 7 years ago, I had to stop riding motorcycles. But anyway, future, more of the same, just continuing doing what I'm doing. I don't know how, I continue to have heart disease, and I'm on a very short leash, and I don't know, what future I have. This year in Tibetan Buddhism, when we use the same astrology as Chinese, with the 12 animals. So I'm a dog. This is a dog year. And in the Tibetan system, the year that you're born in, when that animal comes around, that can be a very dangerous year with a lot of problems. Okay. And especially this year, for me at 72, is considered an extremely difficult year. And I've had a lot of problems. I have lymphedema that I developed after a broken arm, and
Okay.
Anyway, I've been. My teachers have instructed me to stay basically in retreat the whole year,
Okay.
just focusing on practice. So this year there's that, and we don't know whether I'm going to get through this year or not. Yeah, I'm just going to practice for as long as I can practice.
Well, for anyone who's out there listening or watching, send Bob some prayer, some white light, some just love. I believe that what is to be is to be. But I just hope you're happy and comfortable on whatever journey that is. You seem like you are, so I'm super honored. Again, I have to say that that you took some time out to chat. This is so great.
Yeah, and when you asked, my routine answer for 6 or 7 years is simply no.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you why I said yes to this. I have no idea, but it was something made me say yes, and it has been an enjoyable conversation. If anybody else gets anything useful out of it, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you for asking.
No,
Appreciate it.
On behalf of everyone, you are the mentor. You are who I'm so appreciative, and so many to just hear from and know what life past Chinese medicine or later on after putting in so much time and effort can look like and does, and imparting some wisdom back to the 20-year-old self. And it's just you've never stopped teaching, and this is just another class maybe that you've given.
Yeah, maybe.
Awesome. Well, I don't know what to say besides thank you so much. And
Thank you.
and we will be in touch with you again maybe soon, maybe after this year, after your year of the dog has passed. We can touch base again sometime. But once again, thank you so much, Bob, or Lama Pema.
Thank you, Spence. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.